I then had the 9th Illinois forming a line dismantled at the junction of the Big and Little Butler, where the high and abrupt bluffs on either side made the valley quite narrow. And this made good support for the 2nd Iowa when compelled to fall back. Mock, hearing all the shooting and stuff, he's trying to get back to his command. And you can see that blue line coming back. He's trying to, and he's basically surrounded now. And then the situation gets worse, and I can just talk through this here. The Confederates basically, if I get this, pushed this Union brigade down into this pocket between these two bluffs against what many of the Union soldiers thought was no chance to escape. The creek was high. They thought it was a trap that the Confederates had devised, but yet there was a ford here that someone had tipped them off to the day before. And because they knew that ford was there, even though it was a horse ford, they were able to create a ford for their wagons and stuff, and they were able to take it. Mock's command ends up running around cross country trying to figure out a way to escape, and they actually capture a letter, a curve that was really important. And that guy back there was Colonel Crossland, and he was of the Kentucky cavalry. He was wounded, severely wounded during this engagement. Anyway, the soldiers, the Union soldiers, escape across this little unknown ford, hidden ford is what I like to call it. And Coon would say that when they got across, he said the rebels made the hideous cry that only rebels could make, talking about the rebel yell when they got across. This is a picture of what the hidden ford looks like today. It actually runs at an angle, almost straight up the creek, the way the crossing is, so it's a little strange. But notice the high bluff here. And when Coon said he sent all the spades and axes to the ford, they actually had to create an inverse ramp for their wagons and artillery to get down this bluff and cross the creek. Mr. Lanny Perry, who's with us today, I wanted to verify that was where the crossing was. And Lanny found a dropped Spencer carbine bullet there, just right where you would think an infantryman would be at the crest line. Yeah, and a lot of shot bullets. Yeah, yeah.
I was looking to find a whole shell. What was your time span, Brad, on all those little skirmishes?
That happened in like 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours. I mean, it's going on like crazy. Yeah. We're talking about several miles, this skirmish, and nobody ever talks about. I don't understand when they write about Hood's campaign, they never talk about this skirmish. I mean, one of the things that happened here is several of Biffle's cavalry soldiers lived in that area, and there was a back road that would have got them to that ford, and the Confederates actually could have got to that ford quicker than the Union forces. But none of those guys were there. They were over near Waynesboro. So that's just, one of those fates of war. This is a dispatch that Mock captured. And because he captured that dispatch, and because of all these movements they saw of Confederate cavalry, Union forces abandoned the whole Shoal Creek line. And they moved, within a day, they would move to Lawrenceburg. And so Forrest got there on the 21st. The Union cavalry was waiting for him. So if this battle doesn't happen, Forrest gets on their flank, and the whole Hood campaign changes drastically because Hatch's cavalry was able to keep Forrest from slowing the infantry forces from going to Pulaski to Columbia.
So if I got this right in my mind, based on the description you're given, the Union cavalry escapes 3 times, and then once they cross Shoals Creek, they essentially escape the 4th time. Is that right?
It's really twice, but close to that, yeah. They had Croxton's brigade escapes at November 5th. This brigade, if you see the movements and stuff, they're being pressed and they get driven off the road, which is a no-no back then. You get driven away from a road, that's just like us getting thrown out of a vehicle. We don't feel like we're how we're going to make it, you know. So, all right, so let's go on to the next. So anyway, Thomas is able to gather forces up. You have the Battle of Franklin, and you also have the Battle of Nashville, and they come back. One of the things the official records say is that the Confederates advanced on the Waynesboro, Chisholm, and the military roads. And what I found is that Stewart's Corps, who was supposed to go in the military, just about all his soldiers show that they went up the Butler Creek Road. And Lee's Corps basically went up the Butler Creek Road. So it's a little different, you know, and the reason I think that happened, and I still got to prove this, is because of all those felled trees and those hollows leading from Shoals Creek. And I got a pioneer guy that was in Stewart's Corps, and he said, we worked on the bridge and had to quit halfway through, and then he talked about going north on Butler Creek Road. So as the Confederates are coming back after what happened at Franklin and Nashville, one of the things that we're going to talk about is you know, they got the waters up. The Union Navy can get to Florence. And so they send Admiral Lee with a flotilla to destroy the pontoon bridge that they expect that Hood will use in crossing. And he had 4 ships. He had the Cincinnati, which is that ship right there. This is a time period painting of East Part just right after January 1865. He had the Neosho, which is that ship there, and here is better look at it. And he had 2 tin-clads, the Reindeer and the Fairy, and they looked like this. The Cincinnati couldn't get over the Colbert Shoals, which was down there between Waterloo and Natchez Trace, so it never left Eastport. But Lee would take the Neosho, the Fairy, and the Reindeer, these 2 tin-clads, and go up to Florence. These tin-clads were called that because they didn't have any armor. And so they mounted usually 32-pound guns, howitzers. They were still formidable firepower, but they could also be sunk very easily. This ship, totally different discussion. It's got 11-inch Dahlgren guns, cannonballs, huge, weighs 165 pounds. The shell does, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the other thing about this ship is they put all the weight at the front and the back, and this allowed it to have a very shallow draft. So its draft was actually the same as this tin-clad. It didn't weigh near as much. It didn't handle well. That's another discussion, but it's a very interesting thing because really they didn't have many of these boats like this. They had 2 in the west. It was designed for this right here. It was designed to go into shallow waters where no other boat could go and be a fire platform. So it was made to destroy this pontoon bridge. Okay, there's a picture of Admiral Lee. When he gets to Florence, he's blowing up flats and pontoons all the way, and this is on December 25th. He gets to Florence. There's no pontoon bridge here. He's been told there's going to be a pontoon bridge. He's confused. He goes up and back down the river. He shoots in these entrenchments that are empty, and there's actually a shell with that's probably from the Neosho, as big as that case shot is, with a ball that was found near the Florence Coliseum where one of Beauregard's fortifications had put. But there was nothing in there. And the only reason I know he shot at them is because Union gunboat log says he shot at them. So this firsthand happened that day, wrote it down, but they said they didn't see any Confederates. He goes back down the river and somebody hails him from the bank. This is near dark, and he's told that there's the Confederates are building a bridge up near Bainbridge. Okay? Well, he goes all the way back to Eastport, figure out what he's going to do. Crosses back over the Colbert Shoals. So on the night of the 25th, he's at Eastport, Mississippi. That night, the Confederates miraculously, and a lot has to do with the engineers, that's one of them, get the bridge built at Bainbridge. And this bridge is a novelty. It's probably the most scrap put together thing in the history of Civil War history. Okay, it is just amazing they get this bridge across, and we're going to talk about that just a little bit more with Kurt's painting. You didn't bring the other one though, did you? Okay, well we'll talk about it just a little bit, but the Confederate soldier says it was shaped like a crescent moon. That's how fast the current was moving it. And even though they didn't have to go very far to cross at Bainbridge, with the current, the water was up. They tore houses and barns down to put the material on because during the retreat, they were losing wagons because of the mud. They couldn't get all the materials back. And if you never read a story about Hood's campaign, you ought to read it just to read about some of the experiences that people told about this pontoon bridge and what they had to do on the retreat. I'd like to go into it, but we're pressed with time, so I'm going to go ahead and get this thing finished. So there's where the pontoon bridge is. And these maps that I'm showing here were built by the Union Navy, and a lot of people think they were used by the Union Navy during the Civil War. The Union Navy finished them in May 1865. The only reason they finished them then was because the war was over and they said they was finished, but they actually were supposed to do a little bit more with these maps. So that's a very interesting thing. But this thing, there's where the bridge was. They kind of got it marked here. But they also marked where these Confederate batteries were. The reason they marked where those Confederate batteries were is because on the 26th, the day after, Lee comes back up. He says there must be a pontoon bridge up there. I've got kind of some information, people saying it. Even though my pilots had told me they can't build one up there, I'm going to go check it out. So that's where they head. They're going to go check it out. He don't blame the Neo show. Now, that is, I've got some of his notes about what happened and stuff. He don't explain that. And the reason don't explain that is because he knows he made a mistake. He should have had that boat with him. Because the Confederates didn't think they were going to get there. That's why they didn't put any guns at Florence. And they only had guns here, and this is about where the Darby place is, on the bluff, and they had one battery. The rest of the batteries are out on the perimeter because they're worried about Union infantry or cavalry getting there, and they're going to have to fight because the pontoon bridge doesn't make or anything like that. Lee gets inside of the pontoon bridge, sees it, turns to fire, and there's the whole story. I could sit up here an hour and talk about this thing. The Confederate artillerymen fire immediately, and there's this mad confusion. That startles the Navy. I hate to say this, you being an Annapolis guy, but it startles the Navy, and they're in shallow water already. Navy guys don't like shallow water, and so he leaves. Now I think he leaves because he knows he probably is outgunned, possibly, because he don't know what's ahead of him. He's just barely within range of the bridge. Confederate soldiers talk about shells landing around the bridge, but this battery's up on the bluff way above him, and he's got these two little tinklads, and all he can probably thinking is, I'm going to lose both my boats here. When I got that ironclad, I can get back up here. Okay? That's the only reason I can come up with why he walked away. Made General James Wilson really angry. That's, again, a whole nother discussion. Maybe that'll be in the book. So, what did the most shows look like? That's what it looks like today. That's the best picture I could find on the internet. That's what Wilson Lake looked half full. You could start to see that little Bainbridge area come out and show itself. And this is deep, 40 feet still here. And way back there, you can actually see the big most shows. You can actually see it looks like a fall there, the way that looks. But a better way to look at that is this picture. Dam's not finished. You can see the rapids on the Little Muscle Shoals. This was called the Raccoon Bar. It ran across here. I got to learn a lot of geology here with this whole thing. Anyway, they crossed right here is where the pontoon bridge. The steamboats got around this turn, and when they did, and they got in this chute where they could see up the chute and see that bridge, that's where they were when the Confederates fired on them. The Confederate artillery was in this area where they could shoot down. By the way, the captain was told to fire as soon as he saw smoke of a gunboat because the Confederates, think about it, that current's running real fast, 5-6 miles an hour. Those gunboats can't go but 10, so they're just like, they look like little ducks trying to get up the river. And they could move artillery real quick into position if he would have fired, but he didn't. He waited until he said they were almost point blank range because he didn't understand why he was ever required to fire that quick. And so we had an artist here, Mr. Kirk Vetters, and he painted all this. He got the crescent in the thing, got the gunboats and the artillery. You want to talk about this a little bit, Kirk?
No, you keep plowing.
You sure?
You got it. Yeah, Greg has been my inspiration on all these paintings, and putting the gun battery up there, getting the windage right, blowing up the river, and I mean it was just a joy to have that kind of information to build a painting around.
That's beautiful. I mean, it's just a really neat event that's documented with a picture, and a picture can tell 1,000 words. So, and the better one is this one. This one, this occurs the next day. Lee goes back down. He grabs his ironclad, the Neosho, shooting these big, huge cannonballs. This one's at Pope's Tavern that they claimed was from the Lexington, but it wasn't. The Lexington could never shoot a cannonball this big, couldn't carry guns that big. And the Neosho came up. The Confederates moved artillery down to Florence, and they probably moved it all down the river to protect that pontoon bridge, now that they realized that the gunboats could get there. Lee gets up here. They basically knock this gun into the river, kill a couple of guys. They dismount the other gun that's here. According to the Confederate gunners up here, they never did shoot at him. I don't know if that was because of the bluff elevation or what, but they never fired on him. And Lee knocks them out. The path is clear upstream, at least to that point, and they go no further. And he says later it's because his pilot declined to go on the Muscle Shoals because the river was rapidly falling. It sounded like maybe a CYA to me, but that's what he said. What you did right here, it's just fascinating. There's the Indian Mound. There's the fortification that was up near the Coliseum.
That berm around the Indian Mound, like Kurt was talking about, I'm sure Hayes knows about it. In the old days, there was a berm that went around that thing slowly. They just got it loaded.
Yeah, and Court Street, you see, used to come on the east side of the Indian Mound and curved around. And then I was talking to Calvin, who's the architect that built this place, and we were talking about the fact that there was a significant berm all the way around the Indian Mound. And when they initially built the bridge over, they knew they had some elevation, and they just attached it basically to the Indian Mound berm. And that's why it kind of curved up around that, up to where the train station was at the foot of the bluff.
The berm was actually a wall. It was an earthen wall with wood at the top.
Wood at the top?
Yeah. Wooden top? It was a berm. Yeah, it was a wood wall in the center of it.
It was kind of convenient to put the top of that railroad track on the top of it when they decided to build that.
That's actually part of the original berm, though, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
The older pictures in C.B. Moore's book show the berm, and there's a couple other sketches from some other guys that documented the mound late 1890s, early 1900s, showing the berm.
And whatever they had to add, it was real easy to tear the rest of the berm down to get it. So I bet it was there till right before they built that railroad.
Three other smaller mounds out here.
Was there?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
When was the original bridge built? Where the pylons are now?
It was built before the Civil War. There was one built in the 1850s, I believe, and it was torn by a tornado. It was actually destroyed it was destroyed by a tornado, and then they built the one that was there at the time of the Civil War. I mean, I think they finished it just a year before the Civil War started. I'm speaking from memory now. Huh?
That's the old railroad.
Mm-hmm. That's the old railroad bridge, yeah. What I always wondered is how much was of the original piers there, and there's quite a bit of the original pier is the original pier. I think they added to it around it, but the original piers are probably under that masonry. That's just a guess. That's me speculating.
Well, Richard the sheriff and I worked with the old Gunboat bridge coming down those two historical markers though. They're pretty sure that 5 of those piers, you can tell they look old though. Probably original. You have a lot of them, some of them are underwater.
Any other questions about this? The other slide I just tried to show was how unfair it was to fight a gunboat with 11-inch Dahlgrens. There's a little artillery piece, and there's what an 11-inch Dahlgren looks like. These things could shoot a cannonball 2.5 miles.
And it was close range.
Yeah,
Close range.
they didn't have a chance. Those guys. All right. Any other questions? And to finish what Kurt said, that's what we're trying to do is show a lot of these places that we talk about, whether it's Civil War Trail and Most Shoals National Heritage Area.
Do you have all this in a book form?
I've been encouraged to write a book.
Absolutely.
By several people. John's one of the worst ones. But half the book will probably be about those last 3 slides about the gunboats, because there's actually a bigger national story with it. And I say that because they wrote a biography on Lee several years ago, and they have one sentence about what happened at the Muscle Shoals in that biography. And Lee actually left probably about 5 or 6 pages of stuff to discuss why he didn't destroy that bridge. And it's never been put in print form, so it probably needs to be out there.
Yeah, I got questions. When they scooted out of the Emerald Beach area.
Mm-hmm. November 5th fight, yeah.
Yeah, the November 5th fight down there where they talk about using terrain to mask themselves from the Confederate force coming over the top?
Well, they didn't really talk about it, other than they talked about their position being a good one. I do know from the Confederate artillery guy there was open fields behind the creek, because he talked about them racing across. Yeah. So all that area would have been open fields.
Yeah, I mean, all that was, those 3 points.
Yeah.
Were all plowed farm fields.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then the farm field went out down the bank until it washed too much. They were using all that land for farm field. Then down on the bank would have been all the scrub stuff growing up. So when you got across the other side, even though there were fields, you still had to get up. You still had to get up the hill, and so all that brush, you're obscured. You can't really see the Union forces from the other side of the bank.
Right.
And then as you go into the hole there at Emerald Beach, and you start to climb out past what's called Poplar Springs, from the top of the point where they came from the mouth of Shoals Creek on the hidden crossing, or the one that was up there at the mouth and they're coming in, you go to the top of the hill over there and then look back over, you can't see past there. So the vision literally stops, where the big pretty house is there on the hill.
Yeah.
The vision stops right there. Because once you get behind that other hill, it slides right out and goes right up the military road.
You mean the Huntsville Road?
About the steep ravine.
Yeah.
You know that you can't see any of that on the high ground.
No.
That's how they got away.
Yeah.
Because if they tried to go over the hill, they would have gotten with the Spencers.
With the spin, yeah.
And so they used cover and concealment. I'm retired Army, right? They used cover and concealment to their advantage. By my count, 4 times. You say 2, but I'm saying the first two times that they got sighted and they started out, they really escaped.
Oh yeah, you're talking 4 times.
They escaped 4 times.
Right.
And it's a brilliant piece of cavalry maneuver by the Union commander.
Yeah.
To even get out of there at all.
Yeah.
Then to only have less than 20 casualties.
Well, you got a little bit of advantage over everybody else. I actually sent you a manuscript piece where I wrote a short version of that fight on the 5th. It was what, 9 or 10 pages long,
Yes, sir.
and so it's easier to imagine what you're talking about with that long piece. You just don't get to talk about that stuff when you're giving presentations.
Should
So
I post that to the Facebook page?
no,
Okay.
not yet. What you
Book,
joke?
one of these days.
Yeah, I thought about putting that in a some kind of journal article because it's not known about. You can't find it in any book on Hood's campaign, but just ain't got there yet.
But that
I like playing golf too much.
maneuvering that cavalry did there and escaping from another cavalry,
Yeah,
that should be at West Point.
well, it should
That
be.
should be studied.
That's right. Well, and they lucked out.
Yeah, Croxton did it.
They lucked out. I don't know what would have happened if they didn't know that Ford was back there.
So, yeah, there's some local boy in that unit that.
No. There was a enslaved person that told them about that Ford the day before.
Some local told me.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, and that happened all over the battlefields everywhere.
It did, and it was about getting information. You know, like I said, if my ancestors' farm was on the bluff overlooking Butler Creek, and he had 4 or 5 sons in Biffle's cavalry, and they're not there, which is just luck of the draw type stuff. Yeah. Any other questions?
Greg, did the official records mention the Confederate units involved in the skirmish? And
Yeah, it's Buford's. It's Buford's. I got the regiments and stuff. It's order of battle, so you can look it up. And I've got maybe, when they talked about it, except for the Confederate artillerymen, most of them talked about it 2 or 3 sentences, and they give what their view. And so the thing about that battle, I had to take dozens of these 2 or 3 sentences and then put them together to try to make heads or tails out of what occurred.
Let me ask you this question. Do you feel like it didn't get talked about on the Union side very much because they felt like it was a battlefield failure?
Leaders do that. I mean, they do that in industry. I'm looking at my boss when I said that. He starts laughing. But leaders will, especially successful leaders, I hate to say it, but they have Lee. I'm going to tell you something. Lee's report about what his gunboats did at Florence. Like I said, it made 1 sentence in his biography, but it was all over his obituary. When he died in 1895, they talked about what he did here in December 1865 because of the way he wrote his report. It's an excellent report. It's ambiguous. It sounds good. We did great. Rah, 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 and everybody's fine. And the sailors that worked under him knew that they could have done better, possibly. Now that's under dispute. I could take the other side and explain all the reasons he would have never been able to blow that bridge up. But that's what's fun about it, That's what's fun about this stuff. So, but yeah, I think Croxton. If you look at Croxton, he didn't talk about much about the October 30th fight, and he didn't talk much about the November 5th fight, and he didn't talk much about the October 7th fight that happened here too. You never know any of those 3 fights happened unless you look at memoirs or casualties on muster rolls. And then all of a sudden you say, man, they had a bunch of people killed and captured here. So.
how many times did the city of Florence change hands during the Civil War?
Oh, that's a good one because it depends on what your definition is. If you use my definition, nobody cared about possessing it during most of 1864. So you'd have Confederate troops riding in one day and the Yankee troops riding in the next day. And theoretically, you can say when one rode in, the one rode out, that it changed hands. Yeah. So, but really, the way you need to think of Florence in 1864, before Hood got here, it was really like no man's land. It was lawless. It created a lot of the bad things that happened here during the war, and there was a reason for that. The Union forces didn't consider it, other than coming down and eating the area out, as they called it, where they'd come down and try to grab as much of the economic plunder as they could get. That was, the only concern they had about here was about Confederate cavalry crossing and getting in the rear to destroy the railroad lines. That was the only reason to.
Greg, I think our latest historic film novel, well, he mentioned that in one of his books about how many times he thought Florence had been taken, but I think he was estimating anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he
Occupied.
one thing he did is he went by a diary account one place, and when the diary said the Yankees are here, he changed hands, and Confederates showed up and changed hands. So
I've maybe have repeated this story before to this group, but I understand, and this may be a theory, that there's a student at what's now the University of North Alabama, but he was from Illinois for some reason. And he was down here and was treated well, and he loved Florence, but he was recruited into the Northern forces. And when they were thinking about burning Florence, he got word to the general, I think it's General Hood, said, don't burn those beautiful buildings at the University of North Alabama, because those people are very religious and treated me so well, so those buildings were saved from burning, because it burned university buildings all over the South where any soldiers might have.
yeah, that was probably.
Have you ever heard that story?
I've heard something similar, and if it's true, it was probably Risen DeFord. The DeFord was the guy who came with Cornyn as a guide. DeFord, Risening DeFord. I think I'm saying is right. He was the son of a minister, and he was in Florence at that time, and he was on the circuit route through thing. And I think DeFord's his last name.
That's the story I've heard.
Yeah, and I can look it up to make sure. But he was here during Cornyn's raid, and Cornyn burned a good bit of Florence. That Civil War map, it says partially burnt. I think you try to capture a little bit of that in your painting. Cornyn wasn't a nice guy. A lot of people, what they see as an injustice, they feel like gives them the opportunity to be unjust because they see an injustice. I don't know that. He's a very interesting guy. His own soldier, his own officer killed him at Corinth. Any other questions? I appreciate y'all letting me talk. I'm sorry it took so long to get through this. So,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Appreciate